I can't think of anything more challenging, stretching, testing, and at the same time more fulfilling than trying to build an intimate marriage. In reality, at least for me, it hasn't all been just roses. It's more like a rose garden. There's going to be lots of thorns there amongst the roses. Welcome to the Get Your Marriage On podcast. I'm your host, Dan Purcell, a Christian marriage and intimacy expert and coach. I'm on a mission to help couples have the best sex and most emotionally intimate marriages possible. Our episodes cover topics you've always wondered about and are packed with practical advice designed to help you take your marriage to the next level. My friend Robert recently got me interested in getting a new home gym, and I bought it, got it installed recently, and it's been a blast. This particular home gym is fancy. It's computerized resistance. And what it does is it senses your current strength level and sets the weights automatically to your current level. So as you do your workouts and as you get stronger, it senses that and will gradually add more weight to it as you do your workouts. Not only that, it automatically takes into account what your goals are, what your target muscles are, where you're weak and where you need strengthening. And it automatically builds out a smart workout plan for you with on the video, live coaches walking you through the various workouts and everything. And it's all there in line to help you kind of achieve your goals. It's been also really fun to see my teenage kids get really interested in fitness. And it's fun to see them wanting to increase their own individual strength scores. I bring this up because I've been thinking a lot about resistance and how resistance is needed for us to grow stronger. Today, I just want to get really honest with you and talk about marriages and why they're really difficult sometimes. Frankly, marriages take a lot of work. A wedding may have just been a day, but building a marriage, especially an intimate marriage, is a lifetime pursuit. And let's be honest, there's a lot of pain and suffering that goes on inside of a lot of people's marriages. And I can't think of anything more challenging, stretching, testing, and at the same time more fulfilling than trying to build an intimate marriage. In reality, at least for me, it hasn't all been just roses. It's more like a rose garden. There's going to be lots of thorns there amongst the roses. There's going to be weeds to pull. There's going to be rainstorms. And like any rose garden, it requires a lot of tending, fertilizing, and just waiting. And that's what makes the flowers that bloom that much more precious. For normal people, married life isn't about continual bliss. I love this quote from Gordon B. Hinckley. He says, "Anyone who imagines that bliss is normal is going to waste a lot of time running around shouting that he's been robbed. Most putts don't drop. Most beef is tough. Most children grow up to be just people. Most successful marriages require a high degree of mutual toleration. Most jobs are more often dull than otherwise. Life is like an old-time rail journey, delays, sidetracks, smoke, dust, cinders, and jolts, interspersed only occasionally by beautiful vistas and thrilling bursts of speeds. The trick is to thank the Lord for letting you have the ride." We don't talk a lot about marriage problems, frustrations, and the difficulties of building a marriage worth having. And I've pondered why there's so much resistance and opposition and challenges and frustrations and difficulty when it comes to building a marriage. And these are some of the things I want to talk about on the podcast episode today. First, why is there so much opposition and pressure and resistance? Why is it so hard to build an intimate marriage? I believe God's design for us is to be happy. He really wants us to be happy. It's happiness and joy is the design of our creation, I believe. And there's a path that leads to it. And I heard someone once say that life is 50-50, meaning 50% happy, 50% sad, or the emotions we experience are about 50 of the positive and 50 of the negative. And I've really pondered that for a while, and I think he's right, because it makes sense that there has to be opposition in all things. If not so, there would not be happiness, because you can't have happiness without knowing sorrow. You can't experience joy without knowing sadness. You can't experience peace without experiencing conflict. In other words, if you want more peace, joy, and happiness, you need to be willing to endure more sorrow, sadness, and conflict in order to work through it and work for it. Just as you can't expect to build muscles without resistance. I like this proverb. It says, "Smooth seas do not make skillful sailors." So a lot of times the experiences we go through, especially the difficult ones, can actually make us stronger, and there's something we can learn from all of them. The trick is to be realistic about them. I think on this podcast and other marriage podcasts that I listen to, sometimes we kind of paint this story that everything is roses, there are no thorns. Everything is fine. But the reality is that's not the case in most people's normal marriages. And let me be honest with you, just because I have a marriage podcast and my wife and I create intimacy and sex apps, we host retreats, we offer a coaching program, doesn't mean that we're free from normal marriage and intimacy challenges ourselves. In our marriage of almost 20 years, we've experienced differences in sexual desire, differences in sexual preferences and tastes, where one spouse wants something sexually and the other doesn't. We've experienced weeks or even months of drier spells in our marriage too. And we've experienced ruts. We've had times of not knowing what we don't know getting us in trouble. We've experienced struggles with attraction and finding sexual desire. Entrepreneurship puts a lot of pressure on marriage, and so does homeschooling. And we do both, so yeah, we get it. We've also experienced sickness, work stress, and when a child's needs often interrupt our flow. We've dealt with rigid thinking. We've dealt with morally superior and entitled attitudes getting in the way of better marriage. And like any other couple, we have 3 or so gridlock issues that we keep returning to, that we try to grow through and try to work through. Amongst all these, in my own marriage, we've also dealt with not being fully honest about owning our feelings out of fear of how our spouse would think. So we spin in circles trying to manage each other's feelings, trying to not say things so that the other person won't get upset at us, and we end up settling for less than, and we kind of create a race to the bottom rather than standing up for something better for both of us. As I reflect on these things, I've realized that I actually have learned far more from my failures in my marriage than my own successes. And I have qualities that when used in the right context are very helpful, but when they're in the wrong context, they become maladaptive. Let me give you an example. Years ago, I sold my business and it didn't go as planned. And I handled it the best I knew how in that situation, but looking back, there was a lot of things I would have done differently that would have been a better outcome for me and for my clients and other things. You just learn from your mistakes, is what I'm saying. In fact, this very podcast you're listening to, in a way, is me documenting my journey as I learn what it takes to build an intimate marriage in my marriage. And I'm grateful that you've decided to come along for the ride and learn right along with me. You can probably tell from some of the topics I address from time to time where I'm actually really struggling in my own marriage and where I'm actually looking for insight to help me overcome my own struggles. Recently, I've been reflecting on some of the own struggles in my own marriage and some of the things I've learned from it and grown through it. Here are just a few examples. At the risk of being really vulnerable here, I want to share with you some things. The first is I've quit making it my wife's problem that I sometimes have lower sexual desire. I've opened up and been honest with her about these things. In fact, when I'm really willing to open up and own it as my own problem to deal with, I find that sexual desire comes flooding back. I'm more open to share my fantasies with her. And she, in return, because she's an amazing person, she plays in that space with me, and it's a real aphrodisiac to have a life partner like that. I've had to learn to just quit making my sexual desire problems all my wife's problem, and rather look for where I have a role to play in the matter and take ownership of it. Another is there are times I haven't given her honest credit for her sexual growth like I'd like to think. Sometimes I like to play the martyr. Sometimes I'm not very honest in all my ways that I deal with her when it comes to our sexual relationship. Or I might say she's not trying when she actually is trying. And that's not kind nor honest when I pretend that she isn't giving the full effort that she actually is giving. And the reason why I don't want to give her credit is because I'm afraid to admit that what I really like is to be the superior one in my marriage. I like to think that I'm more evolved than her, that I'm a few steps ahead of her. And if I were to stop and give her full credit for the work she actually really is doing, I admit that I'm not that far ahead of her. And that's why I have that tendency to kind of slip back, and I regress in that area. I've also learned lately how I can share my honest thoughts without being condescending. There's also truth to the adage that the wolf you feed within you will ultimately prevail. As I've made a conscious effort to flirt, relax, and have fun with my wife, things feel so much better, and I can choose to be a great guy around her rather than being an Eeyore about everything. These lessons have made me a better marriage and intimacy coach also, because I can relate to what my clients go through when I meet with them and talk with them. Most importantly, failure has taught me to focus on what I do have control over, which isn't really as much as I like to think that I have control over. It's taught me to turn the rest over to the Lord and rely on His grace. Which brings me to another thought that I want to share with you today, and that Jesus is a fourth watch kind of a God. What I mean by this is, you know the story of Jesus walking on the water? He could see from afar that His disciples were struggling on the boat and in the storm and in the sea. They were toiling in the night. And I think it's significant that He came in the fourth watch. Now, in New Testament times, they would divide the 12 hours of night into 4 3-hour segments. So the fourth watch would have been the last watch, somewhere between 4 a.m. and 6 a.m. So Jesus comes to their rescue in the storm, walking on the water, in the fourth watch of the night, towards the end of the night. And then to add to that story, Peter comes out walking on the sea too to meet Jesus. And when Peter becomes frightened and starts to sink, and as he's sinking, that's when Jesus runs to him and lifts him up. Now, I'm sure this would have been a very different story if Jesus showed up in the first watch of the night, or if Jesus was at Peter's side and didn't let Peter sink in the first place. But that's not His pattern. And I see this pattern in other areas. For example, when the children of Israel were fleeing from Egypt, it wasn't like the Red Sea was already open and parted, ready for them to, go on dry ground. In fact, they were trapped between the Red Sea on one side and Pharaoh's armies on the other side. And that just at the right moment, the Lord parted the Red Sea so they could escape. Also, I think of this story in the Old Testament with Elijah being sent to the widow of Zarephath. And it was the last meal she was preparing when Elijah asked her to make him some meal first. And then the miracle happened where the cruse of oil didn't run out or the meal didn't run out either. My experience has taught me that God sometimes allows us to, lift weights, to build some muscle, precisely because He loves me and trusts the process enough to help me grow through my challenges. He wants me to learn from my mistakes and my challenges too. But at the same time, Jesus is also the strength of marriages. One of the greatest lessons for me is that I can learn to rely on Jesus Christ in my life. He says, "Come unto me, all ye that are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Learn from me, for I am meek and lowly in heart." The Lord has shown me my weakness, but when I come to Him with a humble heart, He has made the weak things become strong for me. For example, this very podcast you're listening to is exactly that. You don't need to be told this, but you probably already know that I'm not a very fluid speaker, and at times I get quite self-conscious about the way I talk. What you may not know is this is my 4th attempt today at recording this episode. This is hard for me to do, but I keep trying. Sometimes I feel like Moses complaining to God that he was slow of speech. Why couldn't you make me, more fluent? Give me oratory gifts like Aaron, my brother. But that's my lot, and I have the courage to keep going despite my shortcomings. And I've also come to trust that God is a God of miracles. And in reality, miracles like parting of the Red Sea and walking on water or having oil and meal never run out. They're actually very rare. And more common, in my experience, are miracles like being strengthened to do something hard, being able to forgive, seeing another person's perspective, no longer feeling burdened, feeling prompted to go serve someone that I normally wouldn't serve. Or the other way around, a friend calling me just in the right moment to give me the information I needed and to be an answer to my prayer, and so on. I like this specific parable recorded in Mark. In fact, it's the only parable that's unique in the book of Mark. And it's about the farmer that goes out and sows seeds, and over time, those seeds turn into crops. The farmer doesn't know the process of how the seeds grow, but he knows enough to plant the seeds and just trust the process. Sometimes my own conflicts have resolved in a miraculous way that I can't fully explain what happened, kind of like that farmer that really can't explain how that crop grew. Other than just that experience of realizing that issue is no longer an issue, or that I've been giving additional strength and confidence to face whatever challenge is ahead of me. I love how in Luke 11 it says, "If a man asks bread of any of you that is a father, will he give him a stone? Or if he asks a fish, will he for a fish give him a serpent? Or if he asks for an egg, will he offer him a scorpion? If ye then being evil," meaning like if you then being mortal, "know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more shall your heavenly Father give good gifts through the Holy Spirit to them that ask him?" Whatever challenge you're facing in your marriage right now, I challenge you to look at these as a stone or is this a bread? If it's bread, make them like weights, that they're here to strengthen you and help you learn to grow. Whatever you're going through today, I hope that you realize that most marriages are difficult, or there are times where things are difficult in marriages. It takes real work to build a strong and intimate marriage, so we shouldn't be surprised that things are going to be tough sometimes. There's also going to be unpleasant parts to being married to someone sometimes. There's going to be thorns among the rose bushes, but nothing has gone wrong just because you see thorns. That's the reality, and let's be real. We shouldn't be afraid to talk about the thorns and difficulties we encounter. You can view these as a set of weights there to help you grow stronger, like that new weight training machine we got, rather than they're there to weigh you down. And we learn far more from our failures than our successes. And that Jesus Christ is the strength of marriages. I believe I can turn to him. I can view what he gives me as bread rather than stones. One day, we will die. And I don't know if I will die before my wife or my wife will die before me. But although I believe that relationships can last beyond this life, it will still be very hard to lose a loved one. In fact, I kind of hope that I'm devastated if my wife dies before me, because that would mean I have put so much effort into my marriage to make it so meaningful and so wonderful that of course I'm going to be sad when she passes. And I want to know at that time that I gave this marriage all that I have and that all that effort was worth it. Thank you for listening to the podcast. Thank you for downloading our apps. Thanks for joining us in our workshops. Thanks for reading my newsletters. If there's anything I can do for you, please let me know. You can always email me, dan@getyourmarriageon.com. I love hearing from you. Follow me on Instagram and sign up for our upcoming retreats. We also have a virtual retreat coming up on June 9th and 10th that you might be interested in. I do a coaching program for couples called Next Level because I believe no matter where you are in your marriage, there's always going to be a next level to where you can take your intimacy. And I help you and your spouse work through those things to help you get to your next level and then to the level after that. And you can find more information on that on my website. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you're interested in accelerating growth in your marriage, either sexually, emotionally, or spiritually, I want to invite you to work with me in my affordable coaching program called Next Level. More information about Next Level and my fun and sexy apps for couples are available at getyourmarriageon.com. Please also don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss a single episode. And be sure to tell your married friends. I promise, they will thank you for life. Now go get your marriage on.